Hi, everyone, and welcome to Let's Talk Risk, where our mission is to engage, inspire, and empower the global community of risk practitioners. I'm your host, Naveen Agarwal, and today I'm really excited to welcome my guest, Lavanya Ramnath. She is a senior regulatory affairs specialist at Insulet. The brief time that I've come to know Lavanya a little bit, I've been just very impressed by her energy, diverse experience, and key insights. She is an engineer by training who transitioned into regulatory affairs and has already acquired such a broad, diverse experience. We wanna learn about that a little bit today. But as you are settling down, I want to welcome all of you and just share with you that this is a very informal and casual conversation. This is not a webinar or a lecture. This is for all of us to engage and share our own unique perspectives. With that, Lavanya, I'm so excited to welcome you today. Let's start with your career journey a little bit. Share where you started and what got you into regulatory affairs.
Sure. And thank you, first of all, Naveen, for having me on your show. And I basically started off my journey as a biomedical engineer. And then back in 2016, I thought I should combine my engineering skills with regulatory because as an engineer, I often felt like I was laser focused on just one part of the process, development or testing. But I really wanted to be that person that touches, each piece of a puzzle and puts the whole puzzle together. So I started off in regulatory because that was a field that allowed me to do that. And over the last 8 years in regulatory, that has been true. I've had the chance to work with almost every department in the organizations that I've been in, be it R&D, manufacturing, quality, clinical. So I really love learning from other people's experiences while I am helping them build products that are safe and compliant. And I also love writing because I get to translate complex technical work into something that regulators, clinicians, patients, everyone can understand and trust. And for me personally, in new product development space, I feel like the engineering background is very helpful because the regulatory person working on new product development and on clinical strategy is really sitting at the intersection of engineering, clinical, and product marketing. And there is always a constant act of balancing innovation, safety, how the user is going to use the device, and what you can actually support with evidence.
Yeah. So I think what I'm hearing you say is that being in regulatory affairs gives you a broader perspective, and
Yes.
the challenge that you face is to create a compelling story, which will present this case of safety and effectiveness to regulatory bodies, so you can gain market authorization. We'll talk about that in a little bit, but I'm very curious to actually learn a little bit more about your personal story and really see how that plays into your commitment to medical devices and the work you do. So can you share a little bit about what makes you so excited about being in the medical device industry?
Yeah, so this is a very personal story. When I was growing up, I watched my grandmother suffer with diabetes because back in the day, the technologies were not very advanced to manage a condition like that. And as I was growing up, I also have seen several family members suffer with heart attacks, cardiac arrest, and that really always put that question in my mind of how we can make the devices better so that these problems can be solved, or at least we can improve the lifespan and the quality of life of people. Even when like I was choosing biomedical or regulatory, this is what shaped my path into the career that I have today. And coincidentally, I've only worked in the diabetes and cardiovascular space in the last 8 years.
Hearing your story makes me wonder, like, how many of us who are in the medical device industry work so hard, but we have a personal connection, we have a friend, we have a relative, we have a family member who can directly benefit from the work we are doing. I think this is the connection that we have with our industry that is missing in many different places. So, and now working at Insulet, I believe you are at the cutting edge of technology and bringing these benefits to the patients worldwide. Let's talk about in that early technology space, what happens, and in particularly when you are going out for an IDE submission. We're going to talk about that today in our conversation, focusing on the risk management side of IDE. So let's first start by Setting the stage, what is an IDE and why does it matter for medical device companies to do it right?
Yeah, so I'll just start with defining what an IDE is in very simple language. It's basically the permission that a medical device gets from the FDA or the IRB or both to be able to run a clinical study in the US. And whether it comes from the FDA and IRB or the IRB alone, that completely depends on your device and the risk classification. So I'm sure everybody knows the FDA, but for those who don't know about an IRB, it's basically an ethics committee that reviews the study, and they are in charge of protecting the people that are taking part in that study to make sure that the participants are safe and that the study is conducted in an ethical manner.
So IDE, just to make sure everyone understands, is investigational device exemption, correct?
Right.
And essentially, what I'm hearing you say is that it's a permission to do clinical trials in humans, not
Yep.
necessarily a marketing authorization. We cannot sell the product, we can just do clinical trial. Is that a correct understanding?
Yes, Naveen, that's exactly right. So this is just the beginning of your journey towards commercialization. And even an IDE itself can have many phases. Like there is something called as a feasibility study, which is basically us testing the very early version of the product on humans. And it's conducted on a very small sample size of 10 to 40 participants. And at this phase, we are just validating if the device is safe enough to move forward for a bigger clinical study. I like to call this the exploration phase. And then once you explore in that phase, companies typically move to a bigger study called as the pivotal study, where you recruit hundreds of participants, and that study happens on your almost final product or like the product that you want to take to market.
It kind of goes hand in hand with product development, right? So we will explore that in a little bit more detail in a bit. But guys, as you are joining today, if you're just joining, my guest is Lavanya Ramnath. She's a senior regulatory affairs specialist with a lot of experience in the diabetes cardiovascular space. And we are talking about risk aspects of an IDE or investigational device exemption. I want to invite you to share your thoughts and perspective. Share if you have any experience with IDEs or doing risk assessments in the very early phase of product development when you're about to do clinical trials. Do you have a device that is in the pipeline like that? What are your questions, concerns, or even insights that you have learned that you want to share with our community today? Please engage in this conversation, and we'll bring your questions and comments in our conversation as much as possible. So, Lavanya, let's continue. I was curious to learn from you, at what stage in the development process is a decision taken that we need to go to the FDA for this IDE?
So that happens pretty early on in the process. That's when like the project is being planned. You first evaluate whether your device needs a study or does not need a study to be able to get clearance. Because
Okay.
there is a common myth in the industry that only the class 3 devices or the PMA ones require clinical studies. And that is true, but there are also many class 2 devices and the supporting 510Ks that require clinical evidence for you to get that 510K clearance. And IDEs actually follow like a different risk classification of significant versus non-significant risk. So the minute you determine that you do need a clinical study, you have to put it in your project plan, account for the timeline, the resources, and detailed clinical study design based on like what your commercial goals are.
So at this stage, it seems to me that we may not have a lot of information available to us, how our device works, or what are the failure modes, what are the technologies inside that. A lot of uncertainty in this early phase. How do you make the determination whether the risk is significant or not? Can you give some examples?
Yeah, so for significant risk, one example would be like you basically evaluate whether your device, if anything goes wrong, can cause significant harm to the patient. So, for example, insulin pumps, they are classified as class 2 by the FDA, but even any small error in insulin dosing can have a big impact on the patient and it can even lead to death or coma. So, those are classified as significant risk devices, and the non significant risk devices would be the ones that it would cause some non serious injury which can be resolved.
So at this stage, we have to make a judgment whether there is a potential for serious harm or not. if the device were to malfunction. Is that a
Exactly.
right understanding?
Exactly. And if like it's a significant risk device, it has to go to both the FDA and the IRB to get the IDE approval before you can start the study. For non-significant risk devices, the FDA does not review your file, the IRB does.
Okay. I think this brings into perspective why we have to do risk analysis early on in the process. And just to connect the dots for everybody from 14971 point of view, we have to identify known and potential hazards and hazardous situations and harms by going through that process. And we may not know everything about our product or the technology behind it or the failure modes, but we need to make our best analysis and judgment, right? And make a determination if there's a potential for serious harm. And I actually agree with you about insulin pumps, and forget insulin pumps, even continuous glucose monitors, which are very ubiquitous now. They don't do any delivery of insulin, but even those devices can have potentially serious harm. Recently, we have a case in the market now. I won't name names, but there has been a massive recall related to actually very serious adverse events. So we cannot undermine it just saying that, oh, our device is low risk, so we don't anticipate potential harm. So I want people to understand that potential serious harm can still occur even though our perception might be low risk. Is that accurate in your mind, or am I missing something?
No, Naveen, that is exactly right. And it's great you mentioned how we should do our risk analysis very thoroughly. And once we do that, the clinical study is actually where your risk analysis is going to meet reality. So in the back end, we can do all the hazard analysis, all the risk scoring, all that is important as part of your development process. But when your product goes to the clinical study in real humans, that's where you confirm whether your residual risks are even acceptable in the real world use, and the risk controls that you actually put on paper, how do they interact with the humans in the real world?
So, Lavanya, this obviously is not a simple decision for a company to make whether to go to FDA for an IDE or not. I'm guessing that even before you do that, they would have done some testing or some analysis to quantify those risks.
Yes.
Is that if that's correct? Can you give some examples of what kind of testing or work that is done, which is not in humans, but still generates enough data to present a safety risk profile to the FDA?
Right. So I recently have been working in the software SAMD wearable space, and these devices are usually driven by software and algorithms. And if they're designed well, the user almost forgets that they are on therapy. And that's the dream everybody is trying to chase. But the more benefits you provide, the more risk also gets introduced. And in this case, I want to say the FDA cares deeply about the benefit risk balance, especially in the pre market phase. So for the evaluations, as you asked, one of the things that we do is something called an in silico evaluation, which is the equivalent of a bench testing. So we run our software and algorithms through simulators to check and to analyze how this will do in the real world. So that's just like a digital version of knowing how it is going to work. So
Mhm.
that is one thing that we do. And the other important aspect of this is doing the risk analysis. And that's beyond paperwork. It's like more of a framework or a strategy. And in my head, this is more than just paperwork. When people hear the word risk analysis, people picture that table from ISO 14971, where
Mhm.
you do
Mhm.
severity, probability, and that is, of course, essential. And it is part of the overall risk strategy. But in my brain, I see like the risk analysis in three buckets when I am working on these clinical study designs.
Okay.
So, the first bucket would be, of course, like looking at your design controls as part of the development process. So, in the design controls, risk has to be evaluated from different angles. So, if I have to put it in very easy words, one would be like looking at the system hazard analysis, where you look at the system as a whole and you ask what could cause harm to the user? How do we prevent this? The other part would be FMEAs, where you look at individual components or parts of the system and you ask what could fail and why that could fail and what happens if it fails. And then there is a risk management report aspect which captures the final summary which shows what risks were identified, what controls were applied, and why the residual risk is acceptable to go into the study.
Yeah, I really like this because I think you have described in a very nice way how the risk management process unfolds. It's both top down and bottom up, and eventually you have to make a decision about the overall benefit risk. One thing that has always been in my mind, Lavanya, is this whole notion of uncertainty. Sure, you have done your analysis, and it depends upon the amount of information and the quality of information you have that you have used to assign those risk levels and do this analysis of benefit risk. The level of confidence that you have in that analysis is something that I feel we don't pay as much attention to. We just complete these worksheets, we write a report, we say, yeah, risk is low or medium or high, or hey, benefits exceed risk, but we don't talk about how confident are we in that judgment. And I just would like you to help us unpack that dilemma a little bit, because that to me will be a key factor in making a judgment about whether you are ready or not to go in front of FDA. That's just my guess. How do you feel
Right.
about that?
So I think even beyond design controls, for most of the devices, the way we confirm that is by taking it to the users. So there is a thing called usability studies, human factors as driven by IEC 62366. So once we do all the back end risk mitigation and risk analysis, we actually take some of these devices out in the market and we verify that the patient is able to use it, not just from a convenience perspective, but also from a safety perspective. And there are many devices, home blood pressure monitors or insulin pumps that lay users are using by themselves without any supervision for most of the times. And that's where things like usability engineering risk analysis also comes into the picture. So you have to think about risk in a way where you think about what mistakes they would make while using the device and what harms those would cause and how you are going to mitigate it. And the way you get feedback for that process is doing a human factors validation.
Mhm.
So you take it to real users and you verify that they can use the device safely and correctly in realistic conditions of the product. Because think about this, a blood pressure monitor, it's a very simple device. But if the person is sitting in a wrong posture, if the cuff placement is wrong, that
Mhm.
can lead to wrong decisions.
Mhm.
Or
Yeah, yeah.
even like things like the UI. When you have apps, especially in the software space now, apps have become a huge part of healthcare management. So
Mhm.
when you have something as simple as a app, even the user interface design choices matter a lot. So for things like diabetes, there is a difference in how type 1 and type 2 users interact with the device just
Mhm.
based on the age at which they start therapy. Type 2 users typically start therapy when they are much older, and how they are familiar with modern technologies, the race, the ethnicity, all of that comes
Mhm.
into picture.
Great. So, part of this work that we are doing, I think that you're describing, is probably helping us to improve our level of confidence in our risk analysis, maybe find some blind spots that we didn't think about before, come back and fix those issues, or maybe verify and validate some of our assumptions with the users. So, what I understand from your description is that it allows us to improve the level of confidence and reduce the level of uncertainty. That's how I'm understanding. So, yeah, I know we get busy planning for these studies because we have to do them, but let's keep the big picture in mind. The reason why we are doing them is because to me, it seems like we want to improve our level of confidence in our risk assessment. So let's get into this. Lavanya, you are currently involved with several IDs and you have worked with them in the past. Can you share with us anything that has surprised you in terms of risk analysis that was a new learning or a new insight for you?
There are a few things that surprised me. One of them was, I think, balancing patient preferences, the benefit risk aspect of it, and then also complying with standards. So, one example that I can give is when we were designing alarms for a new insulin pump, and we have to look at things holistically. So, we look at what the users want, and what they want is the least disturbance possible. So they want the alarms to be as minimal as possible on their system. But then comes the standard compliance part with the IEC 60601 series. and that is generally written for many device types, and they usually assume worst case scenarios, even like including the highest risk medical devices.
Hmm.
So in the real world, how that translates into the device design is that if you think you qualify for a lower priority alarm, you have to justify why that is okay. And that again comes from risk analysis, risk controls, and your usability evidence. Because at the end of the day, we want the alarm to alert the user, but not be a nuisance at the same time.
Correct.
So, say somebody is using an insulin pump, has a low blood glucose, the next few minutes are very critical for them. So, do we want them spending the next few minutes correcting that condition, or do we want them to do a four-step process to acknowledge and get rid of that alarm?
And if it turns out to be a false alarm, then they will begin to ignore it.
Exactly.
It happened to my CGM. Let me share that story with you. I was using a CGM for several months now, and I've shared that story publicly. It would give me like a low alarm in the middle of the night, and I know that it was not right. Anyway,
Right.
Lavanya, we have a question here from Angelina. You did a fantastic job of simplifying it so that people could understand it. Based on your experience, could you please tell how you gain knowledge about regulatory affairs while working? If someone were new to these roles, what advice would you give them for success? That's a great question. Can you share your experience?
Yeah, so I think all this experience really happens on the job. Of course, you can read guidance documents, you can read all the regulations you want, but the actual learning and the actual knowledge gain happens when you partner very closely with your cross-functional teams. You try to understand what each function does and how they fit into the bigger picture. And for people that are new to the role, I would say just be open to learning. Go talk to your cross functional teams, learn what they do, learn why they do certain things, and just ask questions. Like there is no concept of a stupid question. So just ask question, be open to learning.
That's a fantastic advice, Lavanya. And I want to give a shout out to Angelina because she has been on our show in the past. And Angelina, I know you are doing tremendous work in the industry as a mentor to many people. And
Including
I would
mine.
exactly. So I would add to your suggestion, Lavanya, that we should seek out mentors. Just be proactive about it, whether it's in your own company or outside the company. And that's part of the reason why we do these Let's Talk Risk conversations also is to connect people. Reach out to them and say, hey, look, I'm new to this field. Can I just take minutes of your time to help me plan how I should learn? Would you be willing? Please ask nicely, right? And in most cases, people will say yes. That's my experience. But we need to be kind of active about it, seeking help and presenting ourselves. I mean, it requires us to be a little bit vulnerable, right? Because they can say no. Don't take it
Yes.
personally. People are busy. So I'm gonna ask you to share your experience. When did you realize that you needed a mentor, and what did you do about that?
Yeah, so I think the first time mentorship just fell in my lap, I would say, because when I was working at Abbott, I had this amazing mentor, and he just offered to help me during my initial days when I was also early on in my career. And I didn't even know I needed a mentor at that time, but the mentorship that he provided to me during my time at Abbott, I think I've learned the most from him and from others during my time there. And then later, when I was switching to Insulet, I felt maybe I should find a mentor externally as well. And that's when I just reached out to Angelina on LinkedIn.
Mm-hmm.
And
Mm-hmm.
funnily, I had actually reached out to her for a job that she was hiring for. That role didn't end up working out for me, but Angelina is a connection for a lifetime now. She's officially been my mentor in her boot camp, as I call it, for more
Mm-hmm.
than 1.5 years. And she's
Mm-hmm.
also the reason why I'm here today. I would
Yes.
be very shy of public speaking. I would
Yes.
never go and openly share my thoughts, and she's been telling me for the past 1 year to go share my thoughts.
Yeah. So I'm glad that this has come up in our conversation. And Angelina, of course, thank you for being such a force in the industry. And I can't believe how many people you are mentoring and how many people are reaching out to you. I don't know how you find that much time. But guys, what I'm hearing everybody say here is that our community is strong because all of us are willing to give so much of us. And Lavanya, you are mentoring people now, which is great. I want us to know that it's on us to overcome our kind of inhibition or shyness and fear of being turned down. Let's overcome that because I can tell you there are so many people in our community who are willing to help each other. So I would say, go out and just take advantage of this opportunity and also give back. Lavanya, I know time flies. We are at the end of our 30 minutes.
Yes.
So I'm gonna give you a couple of minutes to just think about two or three key points that we can share as takeaway points today with our audience. In the meantime, guys, I want to share with you a couple of announcements. The first one, as you know, QMSR is effective. February 2nd, it happened. What do we do now? How do we learn about what FDA's expectations would be in the QMSR world? Of course, they are evolving. They have given out some, guidances about how they expect inspections will go, but QSIT is out. How do we learn what the FDA's expectations would be and how we can prepare? To help you with that, on Let's Talk Risk, I have been publishing a lot of content for QMSR compliance. I have shared my thoughts in articles and also brought many industry experts for conversations like these. So I invite you to check it out on the Let's Talk Risk website, and please sign up if you are interested in staying informed about that. With that, Lavanya, the floor is yours. Please share any key takeaway points from us today.
Yeah, so the most important one for me would be the mantra that I follow is build as if it's intended for your family. And this is from Abbott Vascular's quality statement, because every decision you make is eventually going to reach a real person in the world. And our goal is, of course, to deliver innovation quickly to those people, but we also need to be responsible so that the benefits are real and the risks that we accept are truly justified. Of course, there's nothing like zero risk, but making sure that the risk is understood, controlled, and it is like much more acceptable compared to the benefit is super important. As far as clinical studies go, I want to tell people to, carefully design your clinical studies and think of risk from all angles, collecting safety data and also allowing you to make labeling claims, because once you have safety data, that gets you the clearance or the approval and you get a chance to participate in the race. But the evidence that you collect is what is going to help you win the race over your competitors when you finally go to market. Because at the end of the day, for your product to be useful to the patients in the world, you have to give them something unique. And you have to give them something that is improving their quality of life. And lastly, I want to say that risk management is not just paperwork, it's a strategy and a framework.
Wonderful, wonderful. And it doesn't stop at launch, does it? Right? It has to continue. And that is where we in the QARA domain have a unique opportunity, I think.
Exactly. It never stops. Like it doesn't stop at like your design. Like even when it goes to a clinical study, you are collecting data about what adverse events happened there. So that can feed back into your risk file and you can improve for commercial. And same with commercial. Once your product is post-market, you have to closely watch what is happening with your product, what are the issues and risks that are still out there that you can fix so that we avoid recalls, warning letters.
Correct. Awesome. Lavanya, what a wonderful conversation we have had. Thank you so much for sharing your insight with us. You're doing tremendous work at the leading edge of technology. Great place to be in. And I wish you all the best in the coming days. Guys, thank you for joining again. I want to do a call to action to you. Be a part of this journey with us. So if you are interested in being a guest on this show, trust me, it requires no preparation, absolutely no preparation, just a willingness to be here and participate and share your perspective with us. Please reach out to me. I'll be very happy to plan a conversation with you. I want you to feel like it is your show. So also let me know the topics you are interested in learning more about, and we will make sure that happens in the future. So thank you once again, guys, for joining.
Thank you.